Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I am your host, Jerron Harrington, back to you with another video. And today, we're going to be doing a double upload day. So first, we're going to be starting with One Piece Rangers of the Sea, based on the heroes of the Morphing Grid series, Part 6. And later on this afternoon, we're going to be doing Part 7. But first and foremost, if you are a fan of the channel and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting that's to come out now and in the future. Where we last left off with our series, we've seen so far the various Straw Hats obtaining their new powers as they all rush to make their way to Marineford to aid their captain, Luffy, as they look to save the life of his brother, Fire Fist Ace, from his execution at Marineford. In the process, we are now reaching the penultimate conclusion to the Heroes of the Morphing Grid series, with this being the last series for now. Now, one thing I do want to address is that there have been many questions and many recommendations for other Power Rangers series. Trust me, this is not the last time you will see these particular Rangers in any way, shape, and form, and there are other stories that I do plan to do for them down the line. You could say that this is just the first phase, if you will, of the story. Once this is finished, I am going to be taking a break for some time, but I do hope I can come back with newer and even greater tales. So that is something I do want you to keep in mind. There will be other series and there will be other Ranger teams and other Ranger villains that they will have to face along the way. I don't want to make this to a point where every video or every series that I make is a part of a grand multiverse. No, this is just a year's worth of storytelling coming to an end. And while we will be taking a break and going and trying and doing other things after this is over, I have not forgotten about these series, and they are ones that I do plan to come back to in some form in the future. So keep that in mind also. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Usopp had been through a lot of pain. He had been hurt and beaten up in various ways. Honestly though, this one might have taken the cake. I mean, thankfully he crashed on the island without feeling too much damage, although all the same he felt like he had been tossed around like a rag doll. Ultimately, he knew he didn't really stand a chance against Kuma. His stars really weren't doing much for him. And his Kabuto, well, it was all but non-existent. Although thankfully, he had been spared his life, but he had been given chilling news. The revelation of Kuma being a part of the Resistance, the revolutionary army led by Luffy's father, Dragon. And even more so, the impending doom of Luffy's brother, Fire Fist Ace, set at Marineford in less than 21 days. Although 3 days had already passed since he had been flung off of the Sabaody, now crashing onto some random island to find whatever it was he was supposed to be looking for, a Sailor-morpher of some sort. He had no idea what a Sailor-morpher even was, let alone what it could possibly do for him, only that it was some great ancient power that he was going to need to change the world. Yeah, right, change the world. The guy who was a scary cat all the way from his time in the East Blue. The guy who seemingly could never rise to the occasion. Although he was really selling himself short. Sure, Usopp had his moments. The times when he was brave, the times when he lived up to his ideals. But then there were other moments where he couldn't stop and ask himself just how on earth he had gotten into this mess. And now, to make matters worse, Luffy and the crew were gone. There was nobody here with him. If he was really going to save himself, now was the time to do it. As he crawled out of his crater, checking his belongings and making sure he had everything he needed, he walked about hoping that he could find whatever it was he was supposed to find, although honestly it wasn't like Kuma really gave him directions. Maybe it could be as simple as finding an X in some random area. He didn't have a map, no form of guide. He wasn't sure of where this item could possibly be, and he knew he didn't have time to waste. Usopp set about running around the island as fast as he could, although ultimately he still couldn't find anything. Thankfully, there were some fruit trees so he could eat. Some of them were hit or miss. One time he'd think he might have gotten poisoned, but he'd think he pulled through all around. Eventually he found his way over to a shoreline where there were a few docks. There was a small hut, and to Usopp's surprise, there was actually someone else that was here on this island. A younger man who was sitting on a dock itself. He was minding his own business, looking out into the sea, his fishing line out into the waters. It looked like he was fishing for something, although Usopp wasn't entirely sure of what. As he called out to him, the man turned, surprised to see that someone else would be on this island. He stood, putting his pole to the side as Usopp walked over to him, tired after having spent 2 days on this island just running about, not sure if he would ever come across anyone else. "Thank God, I found someone on this island." You okay, buddy?" I'm hungry." Ugh. "Ah, I can see. Well, it's about lunchtime anyway. Why don't you sit on by and I'll whip us up some food?" The young man went into the hut and pulled out some fish that he had caught from earlier. Giving it some nice seasoning and starting a fire, the two sat while the fish cooked, Usopp being pleased by the aroma. The man was a natural at cooking, especially with the fish. As the food finished cooking, Usopp would introduce himself, with name and all. The man introducing himself in kind, his name being Antonio. As the two enjoyed their meal, Antonio would ask Usopp what he was doing here on this island, mainly because not too many people came around these parts. Of course, Usopp had a hard time explaining it all, mainly due to the fact that, after everything he had been through, it might sound completely unbelievable. However, Antonio believed that everyone should have their story heard, and he gave Usopp the open floor, or so to speak, to tell his story. With that, Usopp would explain everything. He would talk about his life in the East Blue, about meeting his friend Luffy and the other Straw Hat Pirates, about some of their various adventures and everything they had gone through together, both the highs and the lows. And then he finally brought up what happened at Sabaody, about how their crew had been decimated, seemingly wiped out. And now he was sent here on some wild goose chase to find some type of device that could give him the power needed to help fight alongside his friends. But he only had a limited time to do so, and he still wasn't sure of where to look. Antonio listened intently, not interrupting, not judging. After all, in this world, something like this wasn't impossible to hear. If anything, he commended Usopp for getting as far as he had. In this line of work, there were many young souls who tragically perished, but the fact that he had made it through the journey of the Grand Line, well, that was something that could not be underestimated. However, though, Antonio wasn't sure of this Sailomorph or whatever he was talking about. As far as he knew, he was the only one on this island, and he had been here for a while now, just enjoying the peace and the tranquility, mainly because he just loved the fish. Among all of the things, he had come here because there was one fish in particular that he wanted to catch, the great barracuda. It was said to be one of the most delicate of fishes, one of which that could taste that could rival any of the fine sea. Usopp was intrigued by the idea of catching this barracuda, but he knew he couldn't stay for long. However, Antonio suggested that maybe he should. After all, there was no telling just when and where Usopp was ever going to find this thing that he was looking for. For all he knew, it could be around here. It could be just around the corner, and he'd never know it. Usopp's mind reasoned with this logic, and as such, he decided to stay. Antonio continuing on with his fishing, while Usopp looked around the area near Antonio's hut on the shoreline. Ultimately, he found absolutely nothing, and by the end of the day, he was tired and exhausted. Although, thankfully, Antonio cooked dinner for the two of them. A different type of fish, a bass. Usopp couldn't help but ask if he got tired of fish. However, Antonio would explain that fish came in all different varieties, and that it only took those with the acquired taste to be able to tell the difference. As they ate, they would both talk about their dreams. Well, it was the only thing that they could do, and Antonio had brought it up in conversation. For himself, he just loved to fish. Fishing was his passion above anything else. It was something that he had done with his grandfather ever since he was but a little boy, and it was something that had stuck with him ever since. For Usopp, though, his dream was a bit ambiguous. He had a dream of being a brave warrior of the sea, like his father, and like the many others that had come before him. But honestly, Usopp wasn't sure if he had ever reached that metric. Of course, even Antonio would have to point out that that dream was very tall in order, mainly because it was a dream that could only ever truly be fulfilled in one's own heart. To become a brave warrior of the sea, well, there were a lot of standards. Everyone had their own for what made someone brave. And that's really the part about Usopp that he never quite understood. Sure, he wanted to be a brave warrior of the sea, but in the end, he'd never really know if he had reached that point. He'd never really know if he had ever crossed that threshold. Was it how he viewed himself or how he was viewed in the eyes of others? And even more so, how long would he have to live to be considered one anyway? In Antonio's eyes, everything that Usopp had done, he believed he qualified. But for Usopp, he felt as though there was still more. He believed that there was so much more for him out there, that this was only just the beginning. As he smiled, Antonio would tell the story of the barracuda, the great silver fish. It was one that was rare and elusive, but it was one unlike any other. For many, they believed that this fish was nothing more but a myth, and that in the end it was something that could be unattainable. Many great fishermen of this world, many whom were world-renowned for everything that they had done, had died believing everything that they had accomplished had been in vain, simply because they could not catch the barracuda. Of course, in Usopp's eyes, Antonio was a great fisherman, seeing everything he had been able to achieve. And that even if he never caught this great barracuda fish, it shouldn't be the only thing that defined him. And Antonio believed that. Sure, he wanted to catch the barracuda. That was not an understatement. But if he never did, it wouldn't be the end of him. After all, there was a lot more to the world than just one goal. He believed in enjoying the journey and to live life with no regret. And Usopp, he felt the same. As they were preparing to go to sleep for the night, Antonio would ask Usopp if he wanted to go fishing with him just once, before he had to leave. Usopp knew that he was in a bit of a crunch, but in the end, he figured what was the worst that could happen, and so he agreed. And the next day, the two of them sat on the docks together, both fishing poles in hand. They weren't sure of what they were going to catch, or if they were going to catch anything. After a while, Usopp offered to go snorkeling, since it was one way he caught fish with the crew on the ship, diving under the waters. There were a pair of goggles and he had a fishing net, so all in all it seemed plausible enough. As he dove into the waters down below, Usopp holding his breath, he was able to see the beauties of the undersea, to see its vastness. As he saw fish of every shape, size, and class, he was enamored by the amount of colors that he saw. As he looked through, coming up for air every now and again, Antonio calling out for him and asking if he was alright. The sky would turn to a dark gray. Antonio believed that a storm was going to roll around and that they might have to call their trip off early. However, as Usopp dove back under the waters again, and as Antonio looked off into the distance, he believed that for a brief second he saw something. Something that he never believed he would see. It was silver in nature, shimmering. It couldn't possibly be the barracuda. Under the waters below, Usopp could get a full view of what was coming towards him. He believed that it was indeed the fish of legend, but it couldn't have been the case. However, as Usopp looked closer at the fish, there was something wrapped around it, almost like a collar, if you will. On that collar, there was a chest attached that the fish was swimming with. And in that chest, there lied a symbol upon it. The symbol of the device that he had been looking for. He couldn't believe it. There was no possible way that this fish could have the legendary weapon. That just didn't make any sense. But right now, there was no point in questioning it. As Usopp came back up for air, he looked over to the docks to see Antonio standing worriedly, telling him that it looked like the silver barracuda had appeared, but it also looked as though a nasty storm was rolling through, advising that he should get out of the water and get towards safety. However, for Usopp, safety wasn't really much of an option. That fish potentially had what he was looking for, and if it got swept back up into the ocean, he'd never be able to get it again. Despite Antonio's warning, Usopp would take a deep breath before charging back under the waters once more, net in hand. The storm started to come through, the winds and the rains wiping out the sky above and affecting the waters in the grounds below as they started to move and rock violently. Usopp found it hard to keep his vision forward, but he had no choice as he followed the streak of silver. He continued pressing on, even though his chest started to burn, his legs started to give way, his arms growing tired with every stroke. It felt as though it were a never-ending cycle, like this was going to be the end of him. But Usopp knew that he couldn't afford to quit here. This couldn't be where it ended. He thought about Luffy, everyone else, all the others who were counting on him. He couldn't afford to let them down. Not after everything they had gone through, after everything they had been through. He pressed forward with determination, continuing to move forward, his eyesight becoming fixated on that streak of silver. He would not let it out of its grasp. As he continued pressing forward, he followed behind the fish as he extended out the net. In one swift motion, he reached forward to capture it. As he had managed to do so, The waves began to push and move him in every direction. Even still, he continued to hold on to that fish for dear life, knowing that with it was his only chance. As he continued to hold on, Usopp felt his consciousness slowly starting to slip from him. He felt as though his grasp might not last for too much longer. Just when it seemed as though all was lost, he felt himself being violently yanked from out of the wires itself, as if something were pulling him. He looked down to his trunks and saw that there was a fishing line attached to it. It was Antonio. He violently pulled Usopp back, Usopp holding on to the silver barracuda. In the midst of the storms and the rain, with one final tug, Antonio yanked Usopp from out of the wires as he crashed into him, the two rolling back onto the shores with the barracuda in hand as the storm continued to rage. The two staggered and made their way into the hut, shielding themselves and waiting until the storm had finally managed to abate. Before long, the sky became clear. There were trees and other debris knocked all around, but for the most part, everything remained intact. Usopp slowly awoken, and so did Antonio. As they both looked at one another before looking down, Antonio couldn't believe it. It was the silver barracuda that he had been searching for. And for Usopp, he carefully removed the collar from around the fish. As he looked closer at the insignia on the chest. So, that's what you've been looking for, huh? It looks like it. Usopp carefully opened it. Inside was the Sailor-Morpher, along with a key, a silver key. As he held it within his hand, he had now found what he had come for. Antonio congratulating him as he patted him on the back. But now that he had what he was looking for, he wondered what was going to be next. As he looked back towards Antonio, who was examining the silver barracuda, it seemed as though the two of them had gotten what they had come for. But now, it was Usopp's turn to see his catch. Usopp, very cautiously, would take the silver key and place it within the inner lock. As he twisted it, the Sailor-Morpher would open itself, causing an aura of silver to swirl around Usopp. And before he knew it, he had transformed into the Silver Pirate Ranger. Usopp could feel the power surging within him. It was more than anything that he could ever have experienced or dreamed. But within his own mindscape, there was something else that he saw also. He saw various rangers from the past. However, all of them weren't silver. No, in fact, some of them were different colors. Some were green, some were black with gold. Some were indeed silver, some were red. One was purple, one was silver, gold, and blue. Another one was all gold. In the end, none of them all looked as though they were silver. However, they all stood before Usopp one and the same. They all congratulated him on gaining the power of 6, and they asked that he would guard and keep it well. Usopp promised to do so as he tried to take in the information that he was given about the Rangers in and of themselves and of the power of the Morphing Grid. But there was one small issue. All of them weren't silver. That was when a green one from amongst them would walk forward, removing his helmet. His name was Tommy Oliver, and he was the Green Ranger. The power of 6 was not determined by a color. It was a power that was unique in its own nature, an auxiliary, if you will. Something that wasn't quite typical. It didn't really fit the mold or the spectrum, but it was still a power unlike any other nonetheless. The others would nod in agreement. Among them was one ranger in gold with blue trim. He had a blade on his back, and as he removed his helmet, Usopp would be shocked to see that it was none other than Antonio, the gold samurai ranger. You're a ranger? Mm-hmm. Neat, huh? But there's no time to think about that. What's important is that you've earned this power. And now, it's time for you to go meet with your friends, isn't it? Yeah, but there's no need to worry, Usopp. You are worthy. And I believe that you will become one of the finest warriors that the seas have ever seen. They will know the name of Usopp, the Silver Ranger. As they all moved forward, as Usopp turned, they pushed him along as he found himself back on the shores once again. The hut, Antonio, everything was gone, like he had never been here in the first place. But Usopp knew that he would always be with him. And now, it was time for him to get off of this island. Thankfully, before he left though, Antonio was kind enough to point him in the right direction that he needed to go. He would have told him that he needed to focus on a particular power that he needed to get there, but he had a suggestion for him. He handed him a golden key, Usopp taking it and putting it within the Sailor Morpher. He had morphed into the Gold Samurai Ranger, and with him was a tiny robotic octopus. Of course, he had no idea of what it was capable of until he had put it in the water and it grew in size, turning into a full-blown Octozord. Now having a way of transportation, he was warned to use the power sparingly, as using another Zord could drain the power for some time before it needed to recharge. But still though, Usopp had a way. As he entered into the Octozord, with his direction in sight, he moved forward, moving in fast speed under the waters below. The Silver Ranger had now re-emerged into the world, and Usopp was heading full blast towards his friends, hoping that he could make it in time, as the journey to Marineford would continue. This concludes One Piece, Rangers of the Sea, based on the heroes of the Morphing Grid series, Part 6. As always, if you're a fan of today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for later on this evening, as we will also be doing Part 7 of One Piece, Rangers of the Sea. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.